I call the Honourable Member Charles Chauvel.
Mr Speaker, there's been some interesting contributions in the debate. I think it would be useful if we just reminded ourselves of where we've been in this topic before. And what we should do is go back and remember what we were told by the experts about what the evidence actually is. Way back in 2007, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was the body that governments appointed across the world, filled with experts, and then asked to report back to them about what the issues were. And this is what they said. World temperatures will rise between 1.1 and 6.4 degrees Celsius during this century. Sea levels will rise between 18 and 59 centimetres. There will be more frequent warm spells, heat waves and heavy rainfall, and probably an increase in droughts, tropical cyclones and extreme high tides. Now, those are big ranges in those numbers, but that's what the evidence says is likely to happen. And that's the challenge that we are asked to meet. Well, how have we tried to meet it? There was the Kyoto Protocol, which was a predecessor to the Intergovernmental Panel, but which recognised that there was an issue here that needed to be met. And 191 countries came together. New Zealand signed it in 1998 when the Right Honourable Jenny Shipley was the Prime Minister, and New Zealand ratified it some years later under the leadership of the Right Honourable Helen Clark. If the protocol isn't replaced by an international agreement this year, there will be a lapse in international obligations, and that lapse could be permanent despite the challenges of the science that we were told about only 5 short years ago. My colleague David Cunliffe, when he made his contribution, spoke a bit about the sorts of challenges that New Zealand will face if climate change of the scale predicted by the expert scientists becomes a reality. And I know he didn't mean to downplay the issue. He talked about first world problems. But we actually have some serious issues that we do need to concern ourselves about. There'll be higher temperatures in the North Island, risks of new pests, diseases for plants, animals and humans, more frequent droughts and floods, more rain in the west and much less in the east. That will affect our farming. Retreating snow lines and glaciers, changing river flows in the South Island will have an effect on hydro generation. There will be concerns that we need to very much worry about in New Zealand. And in our region, in our neighbourhood, the Pacific, there will be major problems. Rising salinity in the water table, rising sea levels, issues in an area where already there are major issues around the economic viability of the nation states of the region. Guess who is going to have to pick up both the tab and the responsibility if we are going to be good neighbours, as we like to say that we are in this region? New Zealand and Australia and our friends and allies. But these are going to be problems that we are going to have to face. Well, how did New Zealand begin its legal response after a number of attempts to forge cross-party consensus? Labor in 2008 passed the emissions trading scheme. Now, we nearly got to a consensus between the two major parties, but in the end, and I chaired the Select Committee, Sir, the Finance and Expenditure Committee that heard the evidence on this bill, the National Party decided to stand apart from the 2008 legislation. But that was, I think, a genuine attempt to bring about an emissions trading scheme, an economic instrument that would cover the major causes of greenhouse gas emissions in New Zealand. It was an attempt to extend an economic mechanism that would have some effect on all those gases in all the sectors that mattered. Polluting industries would basically pay 1 carbon credit per tonne of carbon equivalent gas produced. Depolluting industries like forestry would get carbon credits that they could sell on the international market to polluters, and as we hoped, the international market would assist us to provide a mechanism where we could start to reduce New Zealand's carbon position over time. We would get sectors in over time. Forestry went in from January 2008. Agriculture, our single biggest emitter, would come in January 2013. And the big trade-exposed industries were given 90% subsidies via what we said was a free allocation, or termed a free allocation of New Zealand units that they could rely on instead of having to buy carbon credits. And we'd phase that out at 8% a year, a very, very gentle phase out ending in 2030. So that was the world-leading emissions trading scheme that Labour brought into being. It was actually a pretty moderate measure, and yet it could not survive the onslaught of the incoming national government in 2008-2009. Again, there was an attempt to get some consensus across the House. National came in, having campaigned on moderating, as they put it, the scheme. We sought to negotiate with them so that they could achieve their aim, but in a way that didn't completely wreck the emissions trading scheme. Despite that, and despite discussing with Nick Smith in good faith ways in which the scheme could be moderated, the National Party ended up relying on the Māori Party on that occasion and managed to introduce some changes which didn't completely gut the scheme. They did things like put agriculture's entry out until 2015, bring in a watering down of the carbon price on what was called a 2-for-1 deal, basically bring in subsidies for NZUs at either 60 or 90%, bring in an intensity-based allocation model. And so what the experts said at the time was that the emissions trading scheme would certainly fail on the basis of those emission reduction targets that would be brought in place as a result of those modifications. But so just when we thought nothing could get worse, now we see the present bill. And I just want to put on record what the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment said about what this legislation will do if it manages to pass. And before I do that, I'd actually want to praise the Māori Party for pulling its support from the bill. They made a big political mistake back in 2009 by writing a blank cheque for National and allowing them to do the first gutting of the emissions trading scheme. But they're not making that mistake now, and good on them. And this is why. The Parliamentary Commissioner says the ETS is the main system New Zealand has for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Hollowing it out like this makes a farce of our climate change commitments. Well, sir, if the best that we can do now is trade slogans the way we heard in Question Time, where Simon Bridges talks about lowering petrol and electricity costs at a time when the carbon price is at an all-time low and the ETS is actually just irrelevant to that exercise, if the best we can do is hear that Associate Minister perform his audition for the front bench in the mid-next year post-John Key reshuffle, if that's going to be climate change policy in New Zealand, sir, and if we're going to rely on Peter Dunn to do the right thing and not vote for this legislation, then, sir, this Parliament deserves an absolute F for meaningful action on climate change.
I call the Honourable Member David Bennett.
Mr. Speaker, that speech deserves an absolute F for failure to